Hello, second graders. This is Mrs. Gilmore. We are going to be starting into our new unit today. We're going to be starting on Lesson 1, and the first thing we're going to learn in Unit 5 is how to tell time on the clock. We're going to start by talking about the hours and whether the time is labeled AM or PM. So this lesson is going to be in two parts. So you're going to start with part 1 today, and then tomorrow you're going to finish up part 2. So there are 3 questions I want you to answer in your math journal. The first question is, why do we have clocks? So in your journal, I want you to give me some answers to why do we have clocks? Why are they important? The second question I want you to answer in your journal is, how is a clock kind of like a ruler or a scale? And a scale, remember, is used to measure weight. So how is a clock like a ruler or a scale? And then the third question is, what do clocks measure? So if clocks were measuring some sort of unit, what are clocks measuring? So I want you to answer those 3 questions in your math journal. Then I want you to turn to page 221 in your SAB and answer the first question on that page, but don't go on to number 2. Just answer number 1 and then come back to the video and go on to the rest of the video. Number 1 in your SAB on page 221 asks you to describe some of the clocks that you have seen in everyday life and just describe them in words. Then go ahead and continue on with the video. Okay, so on this page I've shown you the face of a clock. Now some of you may know this already, but there are different kinds of clocks. And this clock that I have here on my page is an analog clock. Analog. I want you to write that word down in your journal. A-N-A-L-O-G. An analog clock is a clock that has a face, and on the face it has hands. The clock has hands and numbers. The other kind of clock that you may have seen in everyday life is called a digital clock. A digital clock does not have hands, but it only has numbers on it. So this is an example of what an analog clock face would look like. And I want to see if you know some information about analog clocks. Can you tell me how many numbers are on the face of an analog clock? Okay, if you're saying 12, you are correct. There are 12 numbers on the face of an analog clock. So where should I place the number 12 on my analog clock? If you said at the top of the clock, you are correct. So I'm going to put my number 12 up here at the top. Where should I place the number 1? If you said right next to the number 12, to the right of it, you are correct. So you're going to place your 1 a little bit of a distance, but right, the next number that's going to come after that 12 to the right is the number 1. Okay, and then I'm just going to keep going around my clock, going from 1 all the way back up to 12. And something that helps me to label a clock with numbers is I know my 12 is at the top of my clock. I know the number 3 is on the right-hand side of my clock, okay, going horizontally, I guess, to the right of my clock. I know the number 6 is at the bottom of my clock, okay, straight down from my number 12. And I know my number 9 is going horizontally to the left of my clock. So now, using those 4 numbers, I can add the rest of my numbers in between them. So I have the same distance, or close to the same distance between my numbers. So I have 12, 1, 2 would be in between my 1 and my 3. 4 and 5 would have to come between my 3 and my 6. 7 and 8 would have to come between my 6 and my 9. And 10 and 11 would come between my 9 and my 12. So now I have 12 numbers around around the face of my clock. So now in your student activity book on page 221, I want you to practice labeling the clock faces with numbers, but you're just going to do number 2, number 3, and number 4. So you are going to look at the clock face, and there are going to be some missing numbers on the faces of those clocks. You're going to fill in the missing numbers, and then you're going to come back to the video and keep going. Okay, the next thing we're going to practice here is our hands. On a clock, you have 2 different hands. I'm going to draw mine on my clock and see if you know the difference between my 2 kinds of hands. I always start with my center point between my 3 and my 9 and my 12 and my 6, right in the middle of my circle, right in the middle of my face. Then I have 2 different hands on my clock. Okay, the first one I have is a short hand. Okay, and really it's called a hand, but it looks like an arrow. So I have my short arrow, and then I have my long arrow. And I wanted to ask if you knew which hand or which arrow means which amount of time we're counting. So I first want to start with my shorthand, and I want you to tell me what kind of hand this hand on my clock is counting, or what kind of time this hand is counting. Well, if you're saying hours, you are correct. The shorthand always counts the hours on the clock. The long hand then, this one over here, always counts the minutes of the clock. So my shorthand counts the hours and my longhand counts the minutes. So I call my shorthand the hour hand and my longhand the minute hand. Okay, so now in your student activity book on page 221, I want you to finish numbers 5 through 10. So let me show you on my SAB page here. Down here at the bottom here, you're going to do number 5 through 7. And on number 5 through 7, you're going to ring or circle the hour hand on the clock. So if I was going to do this first one with you, my hour hand I know is my shorter hand. So I am going to circle the shorter hand of my clock on that number 5. Then do the same for number 6 and number 7. On the bottom here for number 8, 9, and 10, you're going to be circling or ringing the minute hand. So the minute hand I know is the longer hand. So I'm going to circle my longer hand on this clock on number 8. Then you go ahead and do it for number 9 and number 10. Okay, the next thing you see here on my page is an example of a clock that does not have any hands on it yet. So Mrs. Gilmer is going to draw some hands on this clock, and I want you to look carefully at my hands, and we can see if we can figure out what time it is. So I'm going to start with my short hand, and then I'm going to draw my long hand. Both of my hands are coming out from the center circle. So, does anyone know what time the clock shows? Okay, very good. If you're saying 6 o'clock, you are correct. If your shorthand is pointing towards the 6, that means your shorthand is telling you that it is the hour of 6 o'clock, and the longhand is pointing towards the 12, which is when the hour starts. So it's exactly 6 o'clock. But here's my question. When you look at this 6 o'clock, can you tell whether it's 6 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the evening? Can you tell that just by looking at this clock? No, you can't. Now remember, the hour hand moves in a complete circle around the clock twice each day. So it goes all the way from 12 back around to 12, and then it does it again. 12 to 12, and then 12 to 12. Then we have certain things that we can say to help us know what time of day it is, whether it's the morning or whether it's the evening. So when we say AM, we are saying AM is any time after midnight. And go ahead and write this down in your journal just in case you forget. Later you can look back and remember. So AM, we're going to say after midnight, any time between after midnight and before noon. And then PM, we're going to write PM stands for any time after noon, but also before midnight. So that's how we're going to decide whether we use AM or PM. I want you to tell me, what kind of activity do you think you might be doing at, well, let's say this clock is telling us 6 o'clock a.m. What kind of activity might you be doing at 6 o'clock a.m.? At 6 o'clock a.m., you might be still sleeping. You might be just starting to wake up. But 6 o'clock a.m. is still pretty early in the morning. What kind of activity might you be doing at 6 o'clock p.m.? Okay, some of you might say you might be eating dinner. I know a lot of you go to Boys and Girls Club, so maybe you are going home at 6 o'clock. I also know a lot of you like to participate in after-school activities like Boy Scouts and sports. Maybe you have a Boy Scout meeting, or maybe you're going to a sporting practice at 6 o'clock p.m. On page 222, we're going to practice using our AM time and our PM time. So here again is a reminder of when we use those different times during the day. So it says we use AM for the hours after 12 o'clock midnight, but before 12 o'clock noon. So we say 9 o'clock a.m. would be like saying 9 o'clock in the morning. Then we use p.m. for the hours after 12 o'clock noon, but before 12 o'clock midnight. So we would say 9 o'clock p.m. is like saying 9 o'clock in the evening. So on number 11, you're going to complete the chart down here. For each time listed, you're going to write whether it's dark or light outside, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, and some sort of activity that you might be doing during that time. So they gave you an example. For 4 o'clock a.m., you want to say that it's still dark outside. It's the morning part of the day, and you're probably still sleeping at 4 o'clock a.m. So you're going to do the same thing for 12:30 p.m. and 9 o'clock p.m. Then at the bottom of this page, for each activity, you're going to ring or circle. When they use the word ring, they mean circle. For each activity, circle the most appropriate time when you would be doing that activity. So for instance, for number 12, it says brushing your teeth in the morning. Well, out of my options here, I have 1:30 p.m., which p.m. tells me afternoon. Well, I wouldn't be brushing my teeth in the morning in the afternoon. Then I have 3 o'clock p.m. 3 o'clock p.m. is in the afternoon as well, and it's about the time we get out of school. I definitely wouldn't be brushing my teeth then. 7:30 a.m. is the next one they give you. 7:30 a.m. is the morning. That's like still pretty early when you are getting ready for school or getting up and getting yourself started for the day. So that one is the one that makes the most sense. So I'm going to circle that one in red. Okay, so you go ahead and try the same thing for number 13 and number 14. Then go ahead and stop the video for today. Make sure your SAB pages are finished and come check them with Mrs. Gilmore.